I drove my daughter-in-law to her prenatal checkup at my husband's private clinic. He asked me to go down and pay for the lab work they needed done. When I got back to the waiting room, a woman I didn't know, sitting next to me, leaned in and whispered in my ear, "What's your relationship with the doctor?" I answered, "He's my husband." She frowned. "Are you sure the baby your daughter-in-law is expecting is really your grandson? I just heard her call him." But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching us from. We'd love to know how far our stories of retribution travel. The soft hum of the engine mixed with the classical music playing on the radio, but I barely paid attention to it. All my concentration was on my daughter-in-law, Sarah, sitting in the passenger seat. Sarah was gently stroking her belly, already slightly rounded. She frowned a little and turned to me, her voice a bit whiny. "Mum, I couldn't sleep again last night. I was nauseous the entire time. I feel exhausted. We're going straight to Dad's office later, right? I don't want to go to a big hospital." I was a little surprised. I had suggested a very well-known OB/GYN clinic in Manhattan, with a team of top-tier specialists and the most modern equipment, but she flat out refused. "Why, honey? Wouldn't it be better to go to a big hospital?" Sarah shook her head, leaning back in the seat, her voice full of absolute confidence. "I trust Dad more, Mum. Family is more reliable. He'll take care of the baby better than anyone." What she said made sense. After all, family always inspires more confidence. I didn't think about it anymore and drove toward Dr. Roberts' private practice, my husband. The waiting room was quite full. There were children crying loudly, the morning news blaring on the television, and adults talking in low voices. And that familiar smell of disinfectant, the same one that had reminded me of Robert for the last 40 years. Just then, the office door opened. Robert stepped out in his pristine white coat, looking as composed and dependable as ever. He didn't smile, but for some reason I felt his smile wasn't entirely natural, a little forced. His gaze landed on me for an instant, then it centered on Sarah. "How are you feeling?" He took her arm gently, speaking to her with uncommon tenderness. He asked her in detail about her health, her nausea, her diet, but he barely looked me in the eyes, not even for a second. His attention to my daughter-in-law comforted me, but his way of avoiding my gaze left me with a strange feeling of emptiness. Suddenly he turned to me and handed me his leather wallet. "Mary, can you go down to reception to pay for the girls' tests? Use my card." "Of course." I nodded, took the wallet, and felt a little sad that I hadn't had time to talk to him more. He was already rushing Sarah into the office. When I returned after making the payment, the dark wooden door was already closed. Sarah had gone in with Robert. I sighed and looked for an empty place to sit and wait. The only chair left was next to a young pregnant woman who looked pale and exhausted. While I was waiting, distracted, she dropped a magazine to the floor. I bent down reflexively to pick it up for her. She looked up. She smiled to thank me. That smile took away some of the tiredness on her face, and we started chatting. She introduced herself as Lucy Ortega. We talked about how hot the New York day was and the boring cooking show on TV. Lucy was a very nice girl. "Are you here for a consultation too?" she asked. I let out a laugh full of pride and joy. "No, I came to accompany my daughter-in-law. I'm going to be a grandmother soon." Hearing that, Lucy suddenly fell silent. Her smile completely disappeared. Her gaze fixed on the closed office door where my husband and daughter-in-law were. Her expression became complicated, a mix of doubt and compassion. That sudden change in the girl disconcerted me. Then, suddenly, she leaned toward me. She lowered her voice to almost a whisper. covering her mouth with her hand, as if afraid some invisible force might hear us. "Dr. Robert, what is he to you, and the woman who was sitting with you?" Her voice was trembling slightly, hurried. The girl's unusual curiosity surprised me, but I still answered politely. "Oh, he's my husband, and the girl is my daughter-in-law." Lucy furrowed her thin eyebrows. She looked around as if to make sure no one was paying attention. Then she leaned in toward my ear again. This time, her voice was even lower, but every word came out with a cutting coldness, clear as a direct stab to the heart. "Are you sure the baby she's carrying is really your grandson? A moment ago when you left, I saw your daughter-in-law call him my love." Those two intimate words were like a lightning bolt splitting my soul. My ears were ringing, my world shattered. The paper coffee cup, still warm, slipped from my hands. The brown liquid spilled onto the cold floor, as if my happiness had just been suddenly extinguished. But I didn't feel anything anymore. I remained paralyzed, my eyes fixed on the wooden door in front of me. In the middle of the daze, memories began to rush back, without any order, like old broken films projecting hastily in my mind. I saw myself, Mary Ellen Castillo, a retired literature teacher, a woman who had lived among books and the small garden behind her Connecticut home. My life had been like a quiet novel, with perfectly ordered chapters, an exemplary husband, a loving son, and a peaceful future awaiting the first grandchild. And then there was Robert, my husband. Not the Robert in the white coat with the forced smile from a moment ago, but the Robert of the last 40 years. The man the whole neighborhood respected for his calmness, his uprightness, and his dedication. I would see him in his study every night, with the warm light illuminating his already graying hair, his glasses slipping down his nose as he read those thick medical books, concentrating. That image, as familiar and solid as a lighthouse, had been a symbol of absolute peace in my heart. A man like that, how could he? And Matthew, our only son, 34 years old, calm, reserved, just like his father. He didn't follow Robert's path in medicine, but took refuge in the world of letters, the mystery novels he himself wrote. Matthew was a good boy, a bit naive in matters of love, with an artist's soul who saw life with romantic eyes. Suddenly, the memories stopped at a day a few months ago, the day Matthew came home with a pale, bloodless face. He stood in front of me and Robert, his fists clenched, his voice trembling and choked. "Dad, Mum, Sarah is pregnant," he swallowed and continued with difficulty. It was a mistake. At Mark's birthday party, I drank too much. I have to take responsibility." At that moment, Sarah was hiding behind my son, her shoulders trembling, crying inconsolably. She kept her head bowed, clutching her belly, so fragile, so small, so vulnerable. I had known Sarah for a long time. She was Matthew's friend. I never imagined their relationship had gone that far. But seeing her tears, seeing my son's confused and guilty face, the mother's instinct in me awoke. I didn't hesitate for a second. I hugged both of them, tears of emotion falling down my face. It's okay, I said. "This is destiny, a blessing for our family." This is the time to reflect on family respect. Every member of a family, no matter their age, deserves privacy and clear boundaries. Trust and respect for personal spaces are the foundation of a healthy relationship. And crossing these lines, especially in times of vulnerability, can lead to painful betrayals. But now, replaying that scene in my head, I noticed a strange detail. Robert's reaction that day. He fell silent. A dense, Terrifying silence. He didn't say a single word of congratulations. He didn't smile, not even out of courtesy. He just walked over. He gave Matthew a very light pat on the shoulder, almost as if nothing had happened, and then turned around in silence to go up to his office, closing the door with a slam. At the time, I only naively thought he was in shock, that he wasn't prepared to become a grandfather so suddenly. And then, other pieces began to fit together. Clearly. One night, while I was happily serving dinner to Matthew, Sarah, with total naturalness, used her own chopsticks to take a piece of braised meat from Robert's bowl. "Try this, Dad, it's delicious," she said with a wide smile, a smile that seemed to have no distance at all. Robert was so startled he almost choked on his rice. He coughed several times, his face flushed, and hurried to take a big gulp of water. I thought the girl was just being friendly, but now I see that gesture was a blatant marking of territory. I remember the times Sarah would make coffee and take it up to Robert in his office. Every time she did, my husband always thanked her, but his eyes never left the computer screen. He never looked at her directly. That way he avoided eye contact, which I used to interpret as adult seriousness, now seemed to me more like the discomfort of someone guilty, and also that strange habit of his. Our bedroom, for 40 years of marriage, had never had a lock, not even when we were changing clothes. It was a space of absolute trust. But since Sarah moved in with us, Robert started locking the door every time he went into the room alone at night, especially when she was hanging around in the nearby living room. I remember once I knocked on the door to ask him for the ointment jar, and I had to wait quite a while until he came out. His forehead was sweaty, and he was breathing somewhat heavily. "I was doing some exercises," he explained hurriedly. I believed him, just as I believed the casual comment from Mrs. Johnson, our neighbour. That morning, while I was watering my cactus pots in the garden, she approached my ear and said softly, "Listen, Mary, the other night I couldn't sleep and went out onto the balcony for some air. I saw Dr. Roberts' car leaving the house, and I also saw your daughter-in-law sitting in the passenger seat. I'm sure the poor girl felt sick from the pregnancy, and they went to buy medicine, right? Poor thing." At the time, I just smiled and nodded to go along with it. I even felt touched, thinking my husband was being so attentive to his daughter-in-law. All those loose memories, all those details I struggled to justify in 1,000 ways. Those signs I myself refused to see, telling myself it was just my age and paranoia. Now, after Lucy's whisper, everything connected invisibly. They were no longer disordered pieces, now they formed a horrifying picture, so clear it hurt. I stayed motionless in the cold plastic chair of the waiting room, feeling a chill run down my spine, seeping into every fibre of my body. A coldness that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from the brutal truth that had just revealed itself. I knew then that from that moment on, the peaceful novel of my life had shattered. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Lucy's worried voice brought me back to reality, but it sounded like it came from very far away. I was still rooted to the chair, my gaze lost on the coffee stain under my feet, which was already starting to dry, scattered like a scar on the white floor. I wanted to answer that kind girl. I wanted to tell her I was fine, but my throat was dry, unable to utter a word. All the strength inside me seemed to have vanished. At that moment, a dry click was heard from the wooden door. That little sound, at that precise instant, was like a whip that snapped me out of my stupor. Reason suddenly awoke. I jerked my head up. My heart started beating again, but they were accelerated beats inside my chest. Robert came out first. He was peeling off a pair of light blue medical gloves with a look of slight bewilderment he couldn't hide. He raised his voice more than usual, as if trying to reassure the entire waiting room. or perhaps to reassure himself. Everything is fine, nothing to worry about. Mother and baby are healthy. Right behind him came Sarah. She was the complete opposite of Robert. Her cheeks were flushed with a radiant blush. Her eyes shone with an indescribable joy, a satisfaction she didn't try to hide. She was walking close behind him, and when he stopped to talk to a nurse, she did something that chilled my blood. She reached out her hand and placed it on his shoulder. It wasn't a loving pat from a daughter-in-law to her father-in-law. No. Her long fingers stayed there, softly grazing the fabric of the white coat in a provocative way. She tilted her head and whispered something in his ear that only the two of them could hear. I couldn't hear, but I clearly saw how Robert tensed instantly. His shoulders trembled slightly. Right at that moment, his gaze met mine. He jumped as if he'd been electrocuted. His bewilderment turned into panic. He nervously cleared his throat and discreetly moved aside, pulling Sarah's hand off his shoulder with a disguised but firm gesture. It was then that Sarah saw me. That girl was a formidable actress. In a blink, the tenderness and complicity she showed Robert disappeared, and in its place appeared the face of an attentive and affectionate daughter-in-law. She ran toward me with a sweet voice. "Mum, did you wait long? Sorry." Dad checked the little grandson very carefully. The words, "Dad's little grandson," she emphasized them as if she were sticking a needle in my ear. I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I only stared intently at Robert, with a cold gaze demanding an explanation. My husband, the man I had been married to for 40 years, for the first time in his life, didn't dare to look me in the eyes. He avoided my gaze and hurriedly focused on some papers in a folder. His voice sounded monotonous, fake, and pathetic. "Here is the ultrasound result. Don't forget to take the vitamins I prescribed." Sarah took the black and white image with obvious joy and showed it to me as if it were a trophy. "Look, Mum. Matthew's baby, thank God, looks very healthy." I forced myself to look at that blurry black and white image where a small creature was forming. But my mind was elsewhere. In the midst of the chaos, a thought flashed like lightning. I needed proof, irrefutable proof. I lowered my gaze to the coffee stain on the floor and pretended to be confused. "Oh, sorry, how clumsy of me. Sarah, can you go to the restroom and bring me some napkins? I think there's a large roll in there." "Yes, of course, I'll be right there." She replied without hesitation and left, unsuspecting. Robert, a bit uncomfortable, suggested, "Let me call someone from housekeeping, you sit down." "No need," I replied dryly, my eyes fixed on the ultrasound image. Taking advantage of that brief instant when no one was paying attention to me, and while Robert was calling the staff, I glanced quickly at the upper corner of the image. My eyes, already tired from age, suddenly became sharper than ever. There, printed in tiny letters, I read with total clarity. Estimated gestational age, 12 weeks and 4 days. 12 weeks and 4 days. I felt as if someone squeezed my heart, stopping it for a second. Mark's birthday party. That fateful night when Matthew got drunk, the night he confessed to me that he had made a mistake. It was exactly 8 weeks ago. I remember it perfectly because our wedding anniversary was the very next day. Exactly 8 weeks and 2 days. The difference was more than 4 weeks. I may not know much about medicine, being a literature professor, but I do know how to count. And mathematics never lies. That baby could not be Matthew's son. That thought was like a sledgehammer to the head. Painful, but completely clear. Just then, Sarah returned with the paper roll in her hand. I hurried to hand her back the ultrasound, forcing a smile that seemed so twisted and repulsive on my own face. "He's precious. He looks a lot like Matthew when he was a baby. The lie came out of my mouth with a frightening ease. Perhaps a mother's instinct, when it comes to protecting her son, can turn a kind person into someone cold and surprisingly good at faking it. The entire drive back home, Sarah wouldn't stop talking. She was excited, rattling off what names she planned to give the baby. If it was a boy, it would be Noah. If a girl, Olivia. She talked about what colour to paint the nursery and which stores to buy the clothes from. I just responded with an, uh-huh, yes, soullessly. My hands were so tightly clenched on the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white, and my gaze was fixed on the road as if that was the only way not to collapse. When the car pulled into the garage, I turned off the engine. In that suffocating silence, the only thing heard was the clack of the engine cooling down. Sarah had already gotten out and gone into the house, but I stayed seated. I remained there for a good while, staring into space, breathing with difficulty. That dinner was heavy as lead. The air in the dining room became so dense that I felt I needed a knife to cut through it. I served Matthew his favourite soup, chicken and mushroom, but that familiar aroma only managed to turn my stomach. Only my son seemed oblivious to the silent storm brewing. He talked animatedly about his new book, about ideas he'd had. He even affectionately served Sarah a chicken leg, telling her she had to eat well for the baby. Eat, my love. Mum's is delicious. You have to eat for both of you. Sarah smiled at him with a radiant smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She accepted the piece of chicken eagerly, but the instant Matthew lowered his head, I saw her glance sideways at Robert. It was a look charged with meaning, defiant, almost like a signal. And Robert, my husband, didn't say a word. Throughout the entire dinner, he kept his gaze fixed on his plate, eating mechanically. His silence was more chilling than any confession, until, as if the last fibre holding him together finally broke, he dropped his fork. The sound of the metal hitting the tile was sharp, dry, abruptly cutting off Matthew's conversation. We were all startled. He hurriedly picked it up, his face red with shame. I watched everything. Sarah's gaze, Robert's nervous reaction. I felt my soul freeze. That dinner was no longer a family meal. It was a silent trial, and I was the only judge who knew the crime. When we finished, Matthew kissed his wife on the forehead and went to his study to continue writing in his world of words. Sarah yawned, said she was tired and wanted to shower early. When I heard the water running in the bathroom, I knew the moment had arrived. I entered the room we shared slowly. Robert was standing with his back to me, next to the window. He had it wide open, and a thin cloud of smoke drifted out into the night. He was smoking, a habit he had quit more than 20 years ago, the day Matthew graduated from college. His taking it up again now could only mean one thing. His conscience was a mess. I didn't beat around the bush. I didn't have the patience for that. I walked over to the dresser and set my cell phone down on the surface. The screen was still on. The image I had secretly taken of the ultrasound clearly appeared. 12 weeks and 4 days, I said. My voice sounded terrifyingly calm, without a single tremor, as if I were reading the weather forecast. Mark's birthday party was just 8 weeks ago. Explain it to me, Robert. Robert jumped. The cigarette in his hand fell onto the Persian rug, scattering small, glowing embers. He hurried to step on them to put them out, clumsy like a child caught doing something wrong. Maybe the ultrasound had a margin of error. You know, medicine sometimes, he stammered, not daring to look at me. Don't lie to me, I interrupted him, my voice still even, but now tinged with deadly cold. You are a doctor. You know better than anyone that a 4-week margin of error is absurd. Tell me the truth, Robert. That baby is not Matthew's, is it? Silence took over the room. Robert stopped trying to justify it. He lowered his head, and his wide shoulders slumped as if an invisible weight had been lifted from him. Finally, he nodded slowly, a nod that confessed everything. He let out a deep, melancholic sigh and dropped onto the edge of the bed, burying his hands in his now grey hair. And then he started talking. A story prepared beforehand, a script precisely calculated to lessen his guilt. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "Sarah confessed it to me. She told me she had made a mistake with another man before. But that guy was a jerk. He abandoned her as soon as he found out she was pregnant. She was too scared, too desperate, and that's why she clung to Matthew like a lifeline. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth. Think about it. How could I break the boy's heart? I just wanted to protect my family, Mary." He looked at me, his eyes full of pleading, soaked in tears. He was trying to play the role of a devoted father, a virtuous husband who single-handedly carried the weight of a terrible secret to preserve the peace of his loved ones. But I was no longer the naive Mary of yesterday. I looked him straight in the eyes, without the slightest hesitation. Protect the family or protect yourself. Robert, today at the office I heard it. I saw it. A young girl sitting next to me heard my daughter-in-law call my husband my love. Those two words, my love, were like a silver bullet that completely knocked down the fragile wall of lies he had worked so hard to build. Robert's face turned white as a sheet. His lips moved, but he couldn't utter a sound. All attempts to pretend, all the dignity of a respectable doctor disappeared. His shoulders completely slumped. And then he cried. They weren't tears of remorse, but choked, desperate sobs of an older man whose every lie had been exposed. The most horrible, most repulsive truth finally came out between the sobs. He confessed everything. The clandestine relationship began with Sarah's visits to the house, supposedly to see Matthew, but the real target was him. The weakness of an older man before the calculated admiration and seduction of a young woman. He recounted that he had tried to end it, but that Sarah had threatened him using the baby, saying it was his, and that if he rejected her, she would reveal everything and destroy his 40-year reputation. But the most appalling thing, the one that turned my stomach with disgust, was still to come. He admitted that he himself had been complicit in Sarah's plan. That night of the birthday party, it was he who called, pretending concern, to convince Matthew to drink a few more drinks. And then, it was he who dragged his own son, completely drunk and unconscious, to the room where Sarah was already waiting for him. "But I swear to you, Mary," he sobbed, crawling to my feet. The boy was deeply asleep. He couldn't do anything to anyone. I just wanted to create a false scene. I swear to God. He knelt on the floor, clinging to my legs, begging for forgiveness. He cried with snot and tears, all mixed together. But at that moment, I only felt a shiver running through my body. A repulsion rose in my chest. Calmly but firmly, I pulled his hands away and took a step back, marking a distance impossible to erase. The importance of protecting oneself and speaking the truth cannot be overstated. Even when facing a powerful figure or a painful situation, silence only allows deceit to grow. Finding the courage to expose lies and betrayal, even from family, is essential for self-respect and the preservation of one's sanity and dignity. The next morning, I woke up even before the alarm clock rang. In reality, I hadn't slept a wink. I spent the whole night lying down, with my back to Robert, listening to every one of his breaths. That sound, which for 40 years was the melody that lulled me to sleep, now felt unbearable, false. Every time he inhaled, I felt the air in the room become dirty. Every time he exhaled, I felt disgusted. But when dawn broke, I still got up silently. I put on the role of wife and mother-in-law, just like every day. I went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. I fried eggs, made coffee, and cut the watermelon into perfect little cubes. The aroma of Arabica coffee filled the house, that smell I used to love. But this morning it only left my throat bitter and my stomach churning. Robert came down, his eyes swollen and red from lack of sleep, or perhaps from crying. He looked at me with pleading eyes, with a pitiful sorrow. I didn't answer him. I just placed the plate of fried eggs in front of him with a dry thud, without saying anything. Matthew and Sarah came down right after. My son still had the weary look of a writer who works late, but Sarah was the opposite, fresh as a newly opened flower. She had no idea of the drama that had transpired in our room the night before. She kept acting as if nothing had happened. She even got affectionate with Robert. "Daddy, can you peel this apple for me? You're the best apple peeler," she said, extending the fruit to the man who was still distraught. Robert flinched. He clumsily took the apple and the knife. I watched that scene while clenching the butter knife so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had to make a superhuman effort to ensure my face didn't reflect an ounce of what I felt, not to scream, not to overturn that table full of appearances. After that hellish breakfast, Robert rushed out to the clinic as if he were fleeing. He couldn't stand the atmosphere, and I didn't want to see his face for another second either. Matthew had an appointment at the publishing house to review a new manuscript. He also left quickly. Sarah turned to me and smiled sweetly. "Mummy, I have an outing with some friends to buy maternity clothes. I won't be long. I'll be back quickly, okay?" She even blew me a kiss before grabbing her bag and leaving. The front door closed. The house returned to its usual silence. But it wasn't a silence of peace. It was the silence of a stage after the actors have gone to the dressing rooms and only I and the rotten secrets remain. This was the moment. I took a deep breath and went upstairs, heading for Matthew and Sarah's room. As soon as I opened the door, a sweet and strong perfume hit me in the face. It was her scent, an artificial one, as cloyingly sweet as her personality. I started tidying up under the guise of cleaning. I changed the sheets and dusted the dresser full of expensive makeup bottles. My eyes scanned the room like those of a wild animal stalking, looking for something out of place, a crack in that woman's perfect facade. My mother's instinct, that intuition sharpened over the years, told me to check the most intimate, most personal places. I flung open the closet, rummaged through every pile of clothes. Nothing. I pulled out every drawer, checking carefully. Not there either. Frustration began to take hold of me. Could the sly one have hidden it there too? Or was I just being too paranoid? Finally, I took Sarah's pillow to shake the dust off it, an almost automatic gesture. But as soon as I lifted it, I felt something hard, a bulge inside. That feeling was unmistakable. It wasn't stuffing or feathers. My heart started pounding hard, so loud I could hear it thumping in my chest. With trembling hands, I placed the pillow on the bed. It was hard to open the zipper because my fingers were shaking so much. I put my hand into the soft, cool stuffing. My fingers touched a leather cover. I pulled it out. It was a small notebook, with a dark brown leather cover, the kind used for jotting down work plans. It looked ordinary, but I knew an abyss was hidden behind that ordinary appearance. I sat on the edge of the bed and started flipping through it. Sarah's handwriting, neat and stylized, but what it said was chilling. It wasn't a diary. It was a detailed plan to commit a crime. It described every step with horrifying coldness. Phase 1. Get close to Robert. He looks respectable, but deep down he's lonely. Old wife, dry son. Just needs a little admiration. An insinuation. Easy. Breaking point. Get pregnant. Perfect. But he wants to end everything. Coward. Who does he think he is? Plan B. Change the target to Matthew, the good-natured fool. One night of drinks is enough. Enter the Castillo family through the front door. Stay close to Robert. Keep enjoying everything. To-do list. Force Robert to be silent with the photos I secretly took of him. No problem. And Mary Ellen is so stupid that with a few crocodile tears, she'll believe everything. When I read the phrase, Mary Ellen is so stupid, my hand trembled. I started breathing heavily. Blood rushed to my head, and I felt dizzy. I felt like I was going to faint. She had seen me as a puppet, a pathetic old woman in her theatre of lies. Risk. If Robert objects, release the affair photos, reveal the child is his, destroy his 40-year reputation. He won't dare. Upon reading the last line, the dizziness vanished, and in its place came a freezing rage. But reason held me up. I couldn't fall apart now. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I pulled out my cell phone. It was still trembling in my hands, but I forced myself to stay steady. With extreme care, I photographed every page, every word, with the greatest possible clarity. Every click was another mark in the memory of that woman's cruelty. When I was sure I had everything saved, I put the notebook back into the pillow stuffing. I zipped it up and smoothed it out, as if nothing had happened. I got up and left the room. I had what I needed now. It wasn't just evidence. It was my weapon. Kindness and patience are valuable virtues, but they must be balanced with self-preservation and proper behavior. Allowing oneself to be manipulated out of kindness is not strength. True strength lies in discerning genuine need from calculated exploitation and acting with integrity to protect loved ones from deceit. I remained motionless on the living room sofa all that afternoon. That comfortable sofa Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. But today, even its softness couldn't calm the storm raging inside me. I stared intently at the photos on my phone. Those pretty letters filled with Sarah's poison. Her plan was too perfect, too cruel. She had calculated every step. She had considered all the risks. She knew the weaknesses of every member of this family. I knew that just that notebook wasn't enough. She was too cunning. If I showed it, she would cry. She would scream that I was slandering her, that I hated her because she was going to give the Castillos a grandchild. She would say I invented everything to separate her from her husband, that Robert invented it not to recognize his own child. In a war of tears and lies, an old woman like me might not win. No, I needed a definitive weapon, a cold, scientific truth, a truth that no one could deny or distort. I needed a DNA test. Immediately, a name popped into my mind. Jessica. Jessica was the nurse assistant at Robert's clinic. She wasn't just an employee, but someone I considered a niece. I picked up the phone. I looked for her number. With trembling fingers, I pressed the call button. "Hello, Aunt Mary?" Jessica's voice sounded clear and cheerful on the other end of the line. I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible. "Jessica, it's me. Are you about to leave work? I have a personal matter I need to ask you about. Could you meet me for a while at the coffee shop on the corner?" "Of course. I'll be leaving in about 15 minutes. I'll head over there." I hung up and let out a long sigh. The coffee shop on the corner was in a discreet spot, hidden behind a bougainvillea vine, quiet and reserved enough for an important conversation. Jessica arrived, with her usual radiant smile and playful braid. As soon as she sat down, she started asking me how I felt about my daughter-in-law, Sarah, and the baby preparations. Seeing the innocence and purity on her face, I felt something break inside me. I was about to drag a good soul into my family's mire. I didn't beat around the bush. I reached out, took her small hand, and squeezed it gently. My voice sounded serious, weighty. Jessica, first of all, I owe you an apology, because what I'm about to ask goes against your professional principles, but I have no one else to trust. Jessica's eyes showed surprise and concern. I looked at her intently and began to tell her. I didn't mention the terrible thing about Robert. I couldn't expose my husband's shame, my family's shame, to an outsider. I only told a part of the truth, enough for her to understand my situation. "Do you remember the day we met?" I asked quietly. "You were thin, desperate, cleaning tables in a restaurant after the landlord stole your deposit. I helped you. I treated you like a niece." I felt my voice cracking. "And Robert gave you a job. He taught you everything you know." "I will never forget what you both did for me," Jessica said, moved, squeezing my hand tightly. "I know you're a good girl," I continued. "That's why I dare to ask you this. Jessica, I have reason to believe that the baby Sarah is carrying is not Matthew's. She is deceiving my whole family. She is deceiving my poor Matthew." Jessica was in shock, her eyes wide open, her mouth opened, unable to say a word. She knew Sarah. She had always thought she was sweet and charming. I looked her straight in the eyes, with the desperation of a mother on the brink of an abyss. "In the next prenatal checkup, Sarah will have to have some blood tests. I need you to secretly keep a small tube for me once you've taken the necessary amount for the hospital. Just one. Can you do it, Jessica?" Jessica froze. I clearly saw the conflict in her eyes. She knew it was improper, a violation of medical ethics. If she were discovered, she could lose her job, even her license. But then she saw my pleading eyes, the deep wrinkles on my forehead from so much worry. After a long silence, she nodded firmly. "I owe you one, Aunt Mary. I will help you. Trust me." Hearing Jessica's answer, I felt as if a stone had been lifted from my chest. I thanked her endlessly, tears about to flow. On the way home, for the first time after 2 hellish days, I felt a little relief. The plan had progressed. I was no longer alone in this battle. That night, after making sure everyone was sound asleep, I acted. I went into Robert's office under the pretext of looking for an old book. He wasn't there. The desk lamp was still on, a medical journal open on the table. His hairbrush rested neatly on the desk. Carefully, I picked up some greying hairs that had gotten tangled in the bristles. Then I went to Matthew's room. The door was ajar. He had fallen asleep on his desk, next to a tower of drafts. I tiptoed in, my heart pounding. He had a habit of hugging a pillow while writing. Carefully, I collected some black hairs that had remained on the pillow. I returned to my room and stored each hair sample in 2 separate zip bags I had already prepared. I took a marker and clearly wrote on each bag, "Robert and Matthew." I hid them in the bottom of my underwear drawer, the safest place. Everything was ready now. The bait was set, the trap laid. All that remained was to wait. Wait for Sarah's next prenatal checkup, wait for Jessica's signal, and wait for science to dictate the final truth. The 2 weeks following my secret conversation with Jessica passed as slowly as a century. Every day in my own house was a play in which I was both actress and director. I had to work hard to play my role well, a role that exhausted me. I kept acting as an attentive mother-in-law, an enthusiastic future grandmother. I got up early to cook the nutritious meals Sarah liked. I made her drink milk. I asked her if she had slept well. I even started knitting little milk-white wool gloves for the baby in her womb. But every time the needles slid, my hands trembled. I wasn't knitting wool. I was weaving a web of lies to deceive her, while waiting for the right moment to activate another trap. Robert, for his part, wandered around like a shadow. Guilt and fear were noticeable in every step he took. He tried to start conversations with me. He bought me small gifts like a bouquet of roses or a box of my favorite New York cheesecake, things he hadn't done in a long time. But I only responded with silence or short, cold phrases. Between us was an unbridgeable abyss. 40 years of love had been reduced to ashes in a single night. Then, one morning, while I was busy in the kitchen, I felt my phone vibrate softly. A message from Jessica. "I have what you need. I left it in a small box in your mailbox. I wrapped it well." My heart pounded. I wiped my hands on the apron and quickly went out the door, trying to remain calm as if I were only collecting the daily mail. In the mailbox, next to the electric and water bills, was an old glasses case. I quickly took it, noticing its unusual weight. I felt my heart jumping out of my chest. I went into the house, locked my bedroom door, and opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, a small test tube with a dark red liquid, carefully wrapped in thick cotton. It was it. Sarah's blood sample. The crucial evidence for my battle. I knew I couldn't take it to a New York laboratory. Robert was a well-known doctor. He had contacts in the field. One small mistake was enough for him to discover it, and my whole plan would fall apart. I decided to go further. The next morning, I told the family I wanted to visit Mrs. Thompson, an old friend who lived in Philadelphia, a 4-hour drive away. No one suspected anything. I drove the car, but my mind was not at peace. In the passenger seat, inside my purse, were 3 biological samples, carefully wrapped in a small refrigerated box. I chose a private analysis center, little known but with very good Yelp reviews about its discretion and precision. I walked in, trying to look calm. I used a false name, Mrs. Rose Miller, to register for the non-invasive prenatal DNA testing service. The advisor asked me about the relationship I needed to verify. I felt my throat close up, but I forced myself to lie. "I want to confirm the paternity of my grandchild," I said in a hoarse voice. "I'm torn between my son-in-law and another man." A bitter lie, because that other man was my own husband. I paid for everything in cash to leave no trace, and requested that the results be sent only to my personal email. Those 10 days were the longest of my life. I couldn't eat or sleep. Every time the email alert sounded, my heart skipped a beat. And then it arrived. That afternoon, while I was watering some cactus pots in the garden trying to find some peace, I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. I took it out, and my heart almost stopped when I read the subject on the screen. Genetic analysis result. File 734B. My hands were soaked in sweat, full of dirt. I hurriedly dropped the watering can and ran into the house. I sat at the dining room table and turned on the laptop. With trembling fingers, I got the password wrong twice. Finally, I managed to log into the email. My heart was beating like a trapped bird, trying to break out of my chest. I clicked on the attached PDF file. A table appeared with complex scientific terms, numbers, and graphs that I didn't understand. I didn't care. I slid the cursor straight to the conclusion. The first line said that the fetal sample compared to the alleged father 1, registered name Matthew Miller, 0% compatibility. Biological relationship ruled out. I already expected that result. It only confirmed what I already knew, but it was the next line that made me lose my balance. The second line said that the fetal sample compared to the alleged father too, registered name, Robert Miller, 0% compatibility, biological relationship ruled out. I had to read that sentence 3 times, rub my eyes, and read it again to make sure I wasn't mistaken. No, it couldn't be. 0%. It wasn't Robert's son. My whole world turned upside down again. All my assumptions, my fury, my plans were built on one basis. The baby was Robert's. But now, that foundation had collapsed. Sarah. That girl not only deceived my son, she also deceived my husband. She had staged a play with lies within lies. She was pregnant with a third man, someone completely unknown, and she used that pregnancy to manipulate the men of the Castillo family, pushing them into a disgusting tragedy, turning them into puppets in her hands. Suddenly I laughed. A dry, bitter, deranged laugh broke the silence of the kitchen. I laughed at my son's stupidity. I laughed at my husband's weakness and guilt. And I laughed at myself for having been on the verge of falling into the trap of that fox disguised as a lamb. She had planned everything, every detail, every step, except for one thing. Science doesn't lie. I had everything I needed now, not just one, but a chain of irrefutable proofs. It was time to bring down the curtain on this farce. I chose the moment with precision, like a director preparing the last scene. I knew Matthew had an important meeting with a publisher to sign a contract tonight, and he would return very late. Robert had his monthly meeting at the Medical Research Club, an appointment he never missed. This scenario would be just for me and Sarah. 2 women, face to face. I waited until we were alone in the big house, until the sound of Robert's car faded at the end of the street. I prepared a teapot of chamomile tea. The soft aroma helped me maintain the necessary calm. Then I called Sarah down to the living room. "Sarah, come down for a moment. I want to talk to you about decorating the baby's room." A while later, she came down with a glass of warm milk in her hand. She still had that same face, with that innocent and pure expression, like an angel who hasn't touched the dirt of the world. That face that had deceived us all. She sat on the sofa across from me and started talking excitedly about her ideas. "I think we should paint the room mint green, Mum. That colour is good for the baby's eyesight. And the crib, I saw a beautiful restoration hardware European-style oak one online." I let her talk. I patiently listened to all those plans, those pink dreams she imagined for the child's future. I wanted her to lose herself one last time in her own illusion. When she finished talking, I didn't say anything. In silence, I began to place everything on the glass table, one by one, making small clacks in the tense atmosphere. First was my cell phone. The screen was on, clearly showing the photo of a page from the leather notebook, her diary of sins. The phrase, "Mary Ellen is so stupid," seemed to stare her right in the face. Sarah's face changed a little. The smile slowly faded, replaced by slight confusion. Next, I placed the ultrasound sheet next to it, indicating 12 weeks and 4 days of gestation. It was then that Sarah began to gasp. Her eyes fixed on the numbers. The glass of milk trembled in her hand, forming small ripples in the white liquid. And finally, I pulled out my definitive weapon, the NIPT test result, which I had carefully printed. With a red marker, I circled the 2 conclusions: 0% compatibility with both Matthew and Robert. Then I slowly pushed the paper toward her firmly. Sarah looked at it. Her eyes opened wide. The panic was evident. She couldn't pretend anymore. Crash! The glass of milk fell from her weak hand, spilling onto the expensive Persian rug. The milk spread like the dirty white stain. You were spying on me? Her voice broke, trembling, but the fear only lasted a few seconds. Realizing she couldn't act anymore, her true face came to light. Shamelessness replaced fear. Suddenly she burst out laughing, a high-pitched, mocking laugh. "Very well. Since you know everything, I don't have to keep hiding." She looked at me with hatred, her eyes now without a trace of innocence. "Yes, the baby is not your stupid son's. It's your husband's, Robert's." She stood up abruptly. Her body was shaking with rage, and she pointed a finger at me. Her voice was full of defiance, like a cornered beast. "And what are you going to do now? Tell Matthew that his father slept with his wife? Tell the whole world about the Castillo family scandal? Let's see who ends up more humiliated. Let's see how your perfect family shatters into pieces." I remained seated, my back straight, my hands on the armrests. I looked at her, not with rage, but with pity. I slowly sipped some chamomile tea. The comforting warmth helped me maintain an extraordinary calm. "Robert already confessed everything to me a while ago, Sarah," I said with a serene voice. "He told me everything, without omitting a single detail." Seeing her face of surprise, I set the cup down on the table and continued, pronouncing every word clearly. "But there is something very important, that perhaps you yourself don't know, or that perhaps you decided to forget." I looked her straight in the eyes, which were beginning to tremble. "You should look at the analysis result again. Look closely. This baby is not Robert's either." I paused briefly, letting every word sink deep into her agitated mind. "Perhaps, while planning to deceive both the father and the son, you forgot who else you had slept with. Dedicate your time to finding the true father of your child." My sentence fell like a final hammer, pitilessly, directly onto her skull. Sarah's arrogant and brazen expression crumbled. The hardness disappeared, leaving only absolute confusion. She froze and then slumped onto the sofa like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her eyes remained fixed, lifeless, on the milk stain that was starting to soak into the rug. A white and empty stain. After that heated confrontation, Sarah dragged herself to her room like a lost soul. There was no longer any arrogance or defiance in her, only the twisted silhouette of a loser. I didn't say another word. I wasn't going to waste another breath on that woman. I simply went to the kitchen, grabbed a rag and a bucket of water, and knelt down to clean the milk off the floor. That dirty white stain, like a stain on my family's history, had to be erased by myself. The house was eerily silent. I prepared another pot of chamomile tea, sat in the living room under the faint yellow light, and waited. I had to wait for my son. I knew it had to be me who spoke to Matthew. I couldn't allow him to hear this painful truth from anyone else, much less from Sarah's poisonous mouth or Robert's late repentance. Almost at midnight, I heard the familiar engine pulling into the garage. Robert had returned. He walked into the house and saw me sitting alone in the darkness. My expression was cold and firm. He understood. Looking into my eyes, he knew everything had come to an end. "Did you talk to her?" he asked in a low voice, filled with weariness and fear. I didn't answer. I just nodded my head. Robert let out a heavy sigh, as if all the energy had escaped his body. He didn't dare to come closer. He sat on a separate armchair, his head bowed and his hands clasped. We stayed like that, two silent shadows inside our own house, separated by an abyss of betrayal. The next morning, even before Matthew woke up, I called Margaret. She has been my best friend since college, an intelligent, strong woman, and now one of the toughest and most brilliant family lawyers in the city. I needed her. I told her everything over the phone, without omitting any detail, not even Robert's shameful betrayal. I cried. The tears I had held back for weeks finally poured out. On the other end, Margaret just listened in silence, occasionally letting out an astonished, "Oh my God." When I finished talking, she didn't offer empty comfort. She only said one sentence, her voice firm. "Mary, you've endured enough. Send me all the evidence. I'll stop by your house this afternoon." Hearing her, I felt my strength returning. I sent her all the photos of the notebook, the ultrasounds, and the lab results. Putting everything in the hands of a friend, a trusted professional, relieved some of the weight I was carrying on my shoulders. I no longer felt like I was fighting alone. In the afternoon, Matthew returned from the editorial office. He looked to be in a good mood, with a radiant smile on his face. He told me about a new contract, about how the publisher was delighted with his plot, about his plans for the future. Seeing the purity of his smile, I felt a knot in my chest. How could I tell him the truth and extinguish that light in his eyes? But I had to do it. I couldn't allow my son to continue living a lie. I invited him to sit at the table, where I had already prepared a pot of aromatic tea. Robert was also present. I forced him to be there. He sat at the head of the table, in silence, like an accused person awaiting sentencing. Sarah had locked herself in her room since the night before, without making a sound. I started slowly, my voice firm to hide the inner trembling. "Matthew, please sit down. There's something very important I need to tell you. It has to do with Sarah and with our family." Matthew, surprised, obeyed without saying anything. I placed the tablet on the table, turned the screen toward him, and showed him everything, one thing after another. First, the photo of the notebook, then the ultrasound, and finally the DNA test. I told him the whole journey I took, from the whisper of a young woman named Lucy at the clinic, the suspicions that arose, Robert's confession, intentionally omitting the part where he admitted to helping get our son drunk. I didn't want to hurt him more, to the confrontation with Sarah last night. Matthew listened attentively. His face reflected a painful sequence of emotions. From surprise, he moved to confusion, then to shock. The smile had disappeared long ago. When he saw the DNA result with those two words underlined in red, 0% compatible, his eyes clouded over. The truth fell like a tsunami, sweeping away the dream world he had lived in. He didn't scream, nor break anything. He remained still, his eyes wide, staring into space, as if his soul had escaped his body. Suddenly he dropped his head onto the table. His shoulders began to tremble. He fell to the floor. He held his head with both hands and wept. He wept a heartbreaking, broken cry, full of desperation. It wasn't the cry of a child. It was the sound of a world collapsing. It was the first time I had seen my son cry like that since he was a child and fell off his bicycle, hurting his knee. "I fell in love with the wrong person," he sobbed through tears, each word coming out as if his soul were being ripped out. "I trusted her. I was so stupid, so stupid." His pain was like 1,000 needles sticking into my chest. I knelt beside him. I hugged him tightly while his back trembled. Robert tried to approach, but I raised my hand in a silent but firm gesture that stopped him. At that moment, my son didn't need him. At that moment, only I could be by his side. I held him against my chest. I let his tears soak my blouse and whispered those words that only a mother can say. "It wasn't your fault, Matthew. It was never your fault. The fault lies with those who knew you were a good person and took advantage of it." The next day, Margaret arrived at the house. Not as a friend to comfort, but as a sharp lawyer. with legal documents in hand. She didn't use flowery words. She simply placed the file on the table. Matthew, after a sleepless night, came out of his room. His eyes were still swollen and red, but there was no longer desperation in his gaze, only a cold determination. Without a second's hesitation, he took the pen and signed the divorce papers. Sarah was forced to leave the house within 24 hours by temporary restraining order. She could no longer pretend or cry anymore. When the court officers arrived, she completely dropped her angel mask. In its place was anger and resentment. She screamed, insulted, and cursed all of us. She threatened to spread rumors, to destroy the Castillo family reputation. But no one was listening to her anymore. Faced with the irrefutable evidence Margaret presented, all her threats became useless, like the barks of a cornered street dog. Then, Margaret, on behalf of my family, filed a lawsuit against Sarah for fraud, with the aim of appropriating assets through marriage, in addition to threats and defamation. The trial was quick. With the notebook, the DNA results, and Robert's testimony, Sarah had no chance to defend herself. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and prohibited from approaching any member of the Castillo family for 5 years. The court also ruled that once born, the baby would be handed over to the care of the maternal grandmother, as Sarah was deemed not to have the emotional stability or moral integrity necessary to be a mother. Sarah disappeared from our lives as quickly as she had arrived, leaving only a pile of ashes. The following months were heavy. The storm had passed, but its aftermath remained. The house became too big and empty. Silence enveloped everything. A silence very different from before. Matthew locked himself in his study. I only heard the sound of the keys, day and night, as if writing frantically was his way of escaping reality. I knew he wasn't just writing. He was fighting a battle against his own demons. The relationship between Robert and me became a frozen field. We still shared the same bed, but there was an invisible emptiness between us. We didn't talk. His betrayal, especially the fact of mercilessly pushing his own son into a trap, was too deep a wound. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. I didn't know if a broken house could be rebuilt. One night, while I was sitting alone on the porch, Robert brought me a cup of hot chamomile tea. He didn't sit in the chair next to me as he used to. He just stood a certain distance away. "Mary," he said with a rough, tired voice, "I know asking for forgiveness now is pointless. I don't dare beg you to forgive me for what I did. I just want you to know that I will dedicate the rest of my life to atoning for my mistakes, with you and with Matthew." It wasn't an empty promise. It was the first step. We started talking again, not with passionate words of love as before, but with small, everyday efforts. A meal he clumsily cooked, a potted plant he brought and put on the windowsill, a slight nod as a greeting in the morning. Healing takes time, a lot of time, like treating a deep wound. 6 months later, one sunny afternoon, the door to Matthew's study opened. He came out, thinner than before, but with clear eyes again. In his hands, he held a thick manuscript. "I finished writing, Mum." He handed me the manuscript. The title of the book was The Silent Room. That novel, written from the deepest wounds, from sleepless nights and silent tears, became a publishing phenomenon. It wasn't just a gripping mystery story, but also a profound psychological work about trust, betrayal, and the healing power of truth. Matthew transformed his pain into art. Little by little, he started smiling again. He started meeting up with friends, traveling to new places, and living his life again, with more strength and maturity. Now, every morning, I have the habit of brewing a pot of coffee and sitting at the kitchen table. I no longer feel nauseous. I watch the golden rays of the sun coming through the window and caressing the cactus pots I just planted. They are thorny, rough, but they still rise strongly under the sun, just like my family. And I listen to it, the sound I love most now. Matthew's constant typing from his office. It is no longer the sound of someone running away, but the heartbeat of life, of creation, of rebirth. The storm has passed. Perhaps my family carries scars that will never fade, but we survived. Robert and I are learning to move forward together. Matthew has found his path. And in the sky, after the storm, a new dawn, peaceful and warm, begins to appear. Now, as I sit alone on the porch, watching the last rays of the sun filter through the branches, I understand that life is not always governed by logic or by love. Sometimes, those we trust the most are the ones who hit us the hardest. But I have also learned that the truth, even though it hurts, is the most powerful tool to restore justice. I am no longer the naive woman of yesterday. I have become a mother who knows how to rise from the ruins, who knows how to fight for her son, for the honor of her family. This story of mine is a reminder. Peace does not come from closing your eyes, but from daring to face the truth, no matter how much it destroys our soul. And as long as we have the courage to move forward, keeping love and justice in our hearts, losses will be transformed into strength, to protect what remains and to start over. The hardest truths often hide beneath the calmest surfaces. This story shows us that family bonds, while precious, require vigilance and honesty. Never fear the truth, for it is the only compass that can guide you out of the darkest labyrinth of lies. Forgiveness and rebuilding are possible, but they must be founded on absolute clarity. Stand up for what is right, protect your own, and remember that strength is found not in avoiding conflict, but in facing betrayal with unwavering courage.